Hello and welcome to the CSEA Public Sector Local and Unit Election Committee Training video series. If you're listening to this presentation, you have been asked to serve as an election committee chairperson or as a member of an election committee for one of CSEA's public sector locals or units. This presentation is the first in a series of videos intended to assist you with preparing for and running the election for officers of your bargaining unit. You have CSEA's thanks for accepting this responsibility, and you have the statewide election committee's support along the way. My name is Leslie Perrin, Deputy Counsel in the CSEA Legal Department and one of the staff members who supports the statewide election committee. I will be walking you through the process of running an election. The trainings will be broken down into 4 separate sessions that you can listen to and review when you arrive at that stage of your election process. We'll begin in this session with a general overview of the entire election process, then discuss the first steps that an election committee must take. The next session will discuss the nominating and petitioning process in detail. The third session will cover what happens once the petition or application period has ended. We'll discuss how to conduct a drawing for position on the ballot, how to draft ballots and ballot instructions, the use of ballots in each type of election method, proper campaigning, meet the candidate events, and the committee's role in these parts of the process. Then, in the final session, we will cover what happens the day of your election, whether you are dealing with the return of mail ballots or holding an on-site election using the ballot box or voting machine method. We will go over the count process in detail, then explain certification and reporting of election results, as well as how to deal with protests and what to do once the election has concluded. If you are the chair or a member of an election committee, you will have signed this form, the Election Committee Data Form. I mention this form because by signing it, you agree that you are not eligible to run for office in the local or unit for which you agree to join the committee. You cannot resign from the committee to run for office. However, to be clear, if you are serving on the election committee for a unit, you may run for local office and vice versa. If you are the chair of an election committee, you will have received a packet of materials which includes these 2 books from us on behalf of the statewide election committee. The first is a procedures manual which contains detailed information and instructions about all aspects of the election, much of which will be covered during these training sessions. The second contains all the forms you may need during your election process. In the second forms book, all of the pages are perforated so that they can be torn out and used as is or photocopied. You will not need all of the forms, but the statewide election committee tried to include different versions of many of the forms so that there would be at least an example suitable to any type of election or situation. Of course, you can also always just use the forms as a model and create your own versions, where there are specific things that are required by a CSEA constitutional bylaws or by the rules and procedures of the statewide election committee. We've made an effort to point that out in italics and parentheses on each of the forms. I will be discussing this as we move along. The first steps you should take as an election committee chair by yourself or with the members of your committee will be to become familiar with the procedures and forms in the 2 booklets I just referenced. Try not to feel overwhelmed by the size of the packet of materials. Not all of the information is going to be relevant to every local or unit election. If you have 150 members or less in your local or unit, you will have received a slightly smaller packet of materials, including a copy of the CSEA Candidates Handbook for reference, a local or unit constitution as relevant for your reference, the Election Procedures Manual Part 1 and Part 2, a copy of the standing rules and regulations to be posted, a copy of the notice regarding campaigning to be posted, a candidate eligibility list to verify possible candidates from your local or unit, and an election listing notice for your reference. If you have a local or unit with 151 members or more, you will have received those first items of information along with individual nominating petition forms to be distributed and slate nominating petition forms to be distributed. You may also use forms and checklists provided to you in the manuals for your convenience. The checklist is on page 6 of the Procedures Manual, and an overview of the entire process from soup to nuts can be found on pages 7 to 9 of the Procedures Manual. That is Book 1. As you get started and as you move forward, folks here at headquarters will be available to guide you. Certain departments at headquarters have specific roles in the election process. Don't worry about writing down the numbers and information on your screen. All of this material is on page 1 of the procedures manual. The roles of the different departments are also explained on pages 4 and 5 of the manual. You should know that we maintain a log of all calls received across departments so that when you speak with one person on Monday and then you call back and you talk to somebody else or talk to a different department the next day, we can see what you've already been told and we'll try to be as helpful as quickly as we possibly can. The election committee's overall responsibility is to make sure that an election takes place, that it is conducted according to CICA's rules of procedure, and that it is a fair and unbiased process. More specifically, the committee essentially owns the process for the local or unit that you're overseeing the election on behalf of, maintaining control over all of the paperwork that relates to the election, from nomination forms and petitions to ballots and results. At the start of the process, the committee must make certain decisions about the election. In some cases, the local or unit executive board that appointed you may have directed that the election take place in a certain manner. We'll talk about this in a few moments, but for now, note that an election may take place with on-site balloting or by mail ballot. The executive board may also have set a budget for purposes of conducting the election. As you get started, you should set the date of the committee's first meeting and notify all committee members of the date, time, and place of the meeting. Review with your committee members the election procedures manuals, all of the other material in your packet, including the standing rules and regulations, nominating and election procedures of the local or unit constitution, and any local or unit bylaws that are relevant. If you're not sure about these materials or if you need additional copies, please contact Central Files. You should also, as you start the process, assign different committee members various duties such as checking candidate eligibility, verifying petitions where applicable, supervising the publicity of the fact that there's an election taking place, arrange for the printing of ballots, obtaining a post office box or voting machine, and the many other aspects of the election process that you will see as we go forward. The committee should also determine whether you're going to use an outside election agency to conduct balloting. What that means is that you, as the local or unit election committee, can take control over this process, or in some of our larger locals, an outside election committee is occasionally used. The statewide election committee uses an outside election agency when we're conducting the statewide election of officers because, of course, there's over 300,000 members to whom we have to get ballots and from whom we have to have ballots returned before the election can be counted. This is something that you should consider early in the process because if you would like to use an outside election agency, you need to make sure that it's within the budget that may have been set by your local or unit executive board, and the agency is required to be selected no later than February 15th. The committee should also ensure that the cost of the election doesn't exceed the budget established by the local or unit executive board. The local also has to decide what type of election you should have, whether that's a mail ballot or an on-site election, unless, of course, your local or unit executive board has already directed that it take place in a particular fashion. And the election committee must adopt or create an election schedule, including deciding whether to hold meet the candidates or election events. All the way at the end of the process, the election committee has to certify the election results to all of the candidates and notify CSEA headquarters of the outcome. There is a bit of time for the committee to get rolling. Balloting, voting for officers by the membership at an on-site election or by mail ballot, must take place between May 15th and June 15th of the election year 2017. Voting cannot take place any earlier than that. However, there are deadlines by which certain things have to happen, and there are sometimes time frames between one step of the process and the next in order for the election to be run properly. The very first thing that must happen is that the committee members must post copies of the notice of election, which is here as N1, or if you have 150 or fewer members, M3 on the right-hand side of the screen, along with an election schedule, which you will have to either create for yourselves or select from among the sample schedules contained in the forms manual. Post contact information for election committee members, which you can see here. Goes over where nominating petition requirements are available from a member of the committee. And also post the CSEA standing rules and regulations relating to the conduct of elections for office and the CSEA notice regarding campaigning. All of these are in the packet that was mailed to the chair, and all of these documents have to be posted on every bulletin board at every work site within your local or unit. Obviously, in some places, this is a big task. So again, I refer you back to the idea that among the committee members, you want to delegate and each take a portion of this responsibility to make sure that it happens. These postings must be up for at least 15 days before your nomination or application process can begin. And before you can post these notices, because there's information that has to be filled in, the committee has to discuss and pick or create an election schedule, one that is appropriate for the type of election to be held. There are two methods of conducting an election, either by mail balloting or on-site, which can use either a ballot box or a voting machine. There are benefits and drawbacks to each type, which the committee should consider if it's up to you to decide what kind of election you want to use. A mail ballot election is generally something that is used by locals and units that have a large membership that is spread out over a big geographic area, or that has many work locations and has work shifts that cross 7 days of the week and 24 hours a day. Those are the most common places where a mail ballot is going to be beneficial in order to give every member the greatest opportunity to cast a ballot, because if people work on different days of the week, or if they work at different hours of the day, it's going to be hard to pick a time and a place that's convenient for everyone and that offers inclusive opportunity for all the membership to vote. So a mail ballot is beneficial for locals and units spread out over a wide geographic area. On-site elections, whether you use a ballot box or whether you use a voting machine, tend to be beneficial for locals and units with either fewer membership or all of their members working pretty close together in one or two work locations, so that and on a much more regulated schedule like 9 to 5 or 2 different shifts, so that it will be possible for everyone to show up within a window period that the committee can easily oversee in order to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to vote. When you're holding an on-site election, at least 2 members of the committee have to be physically present in order to make sure that people are checked in as eligible to vote, and that there's no funny business with the actual placement of the ballots or casting the votes on the voting machine. So you have to keep in mind not only where your members are, but how large your committee is, or whether or not you may need to recruit some additional volunteers to help you with certain parts of the process. Those are some of the considerations in picking between a mail ballot election and an on-site election. Another is also cost. A mail ballot election, you have to print all of the ballots. You have to do that for a ballot box or a voting machine, or ballot box as well. But you have to have both postage to mail ballots and return envelopes out to the membership, and postage is required to be on a return envelope so that a member can return their ballot to you in the mail. So you can see with just general postage, you're going to be talking about a couple of dollars per ballot to do a mail ballot election, whereas an on-site, by use of a ballot box, which you can in fact, you can borrow those generally from local election committees, would not cost that much money. So those are some considerations. As I stated earlier, if the executive board of your local or unit has directed a specific type of election, then you have to proceed in that fashion. If you have some concerns about whether the method that they've directed will work well in your local or unit, please contact the statewide election committee. There have been certain instances in the past where the statewide election committee has ordered that an election be held in a certain way, for example, a mail ballot rather than an on-site election, because of problems that have taken place in the past. We can advise you further about these considerations if you give us a call. Also, if the executive board has set aside a certain amount of money to conduct the election, the committee must ensure that the election doesn't exceed that budget. However, again, if that seems to be a problem, please contact the statewide election committee. Once you've determined what type of election you are going to be holding, the next stage would be to pick or create an election schedule. To make things as easy as possible, because there is a lot of detail in putting together an election schedule that covers all the bases, the Statewide Election Committee has provided 3 sample schedules for each type of election: 3 mail ballot schedules and 3 on-site schedules to be used for ballot box or voting machine elections. These schedules appear on pages 1 through 6 of the Forms Manual. If you look at Form S as in Sam-1, which is a sample schedule for a mail ballot election, you'll see that some of the information listed on the form appears in italics. Wherever you see italic font, the Statewide Election Committee is trying to call to your attention the fact that the information is required by the CSEA local or unit constitution, bylaws, or the Statewide Election Committee standing rules and regulations. For example, in looking at sample schedule number 1, the March 1st date notes in italics that postings must be up at least 15 days before the start of the nomination period. That is a constitutional requirement. I mentioned earlier that balloting, or voting, must take place between May 15th and June 15th of the election year. The first mail ballot sample schedule at S1, as well as S7, the first on-site balloting sample schedule, are based on having voting take place on the earliest possible date, with ballots in the mail on Monday, May 16th, or voting taking place on Sunday, May 15th for an on-site election. So that whole schedule is built around the earliest that you can do something for voting, which is May 15th, or mailing ballots on Monday the 16th, which is a weekday, and working backwards from there to build in all the time frames that are required. The third sample schedule for each type of election, S3 for mail ballot and S9 for on-site, is based on having voting take place as late as possible, basically, with mail ballots mailed on May 24th so that they can be out for the minimum 21 days they have to be out in the mail, and still be returned and counted by June 15th, which is the last date when ballots can be cast or counted. Also for the on-site voting sample at S9, for actual on-site balloting to take place and to be concluded by June 15th at the latest. The second sample for each type of election, S2 and S8, is intended to fall somewhere in the middle of the range. Of course, you can create your own schedule as long as your schedule meets the procedural requirements noted in italics as well as explained in the procedure manual. And you can always touch base with the Statewide Election Committee to make sure that your proposed schedule is acceptable so that protests and complaints are avoided. If you pick one of the schedules in the Forms Manual, as I indicated earlier, it is perforated, so you can simply tear it out, make sufficient photocopies of it, and post it with the rest of your notices. In any case, please don't worry. Obviously, I don't know when you're listening to this recording, whether it's in January or March or April, but no matter when you get started, the Statewide Election Committee can and will assist you to create a schedule that will get the job done. That should be enough information to get you started, and that's what we wanted to cover in this first presentation. It should be enough information for you and the committee to get going. When you're finished with this portion of the process, you can move on to the next training presentation for the nomination process. We look forward to working with you and to helping you have a successful election season. Good luck!